So thank you. Everyone is volunteers, and there's no dues or fees for any of the courses that we offer, whether online or on site. And everything at Land of Joy has been provided through the generosity of others, people like yourself, whether it's through the spiritual energy that they dedicate for Land of Joy's flourishing. It's the efforts of the volunteers who are working there to provide support to retreatants, and also the great generosity of teachers like Venerable Yönten, as well as financial donations that help us to pay our bills. So if you're able to donate to either Land of Joy or the teacher, I think the confirmation email has lots of details, or you can ask us. So this is the only one of our retreats that's designed to be completely online, and interestingly, it's also one of our most popular retreats. So I think I will now hand over to our qualified and most precious teacher, Venerable Yönten, to introduce the course and to take us through this text. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you so much, everybody at Land of Joy. I was at Land of Joy a couple of years ago and promptly got COVID, and then everybody looked after me so well, but I wound up teaching online even when I was there. So that must be the karma of my relationship with Land of Joy, is to teach online even when I'm there. So welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that we can do Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It's one of my very most favorite texts. I think it's probably lots of our favorite text. And probably some people haven't ever read it before. So I'm guessing there's a bit of a mixture. So before we start, can I just kind of get a little wave, show of hands, emoji? Who has studied Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life before? Maybe half? Looks like, yeah, maybe half. And people that have never heard the text before, ever? Couple newbies to this text? Yeah, ish, or you've heard bits and pieces but never really studied it? Yeah. The most common place we hear it is that quote that His Holiness the Dalai Lama often quotes, which is, as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. That verse is quoted quite often in our tradition because it's one of His Holiness's favorites. So you might have heard that one. All right, so before we start, we'll go ahead and set our motivation so that we're really in the best headspace to do this practice and to study this teaching. So if you feel comfortable reciting along, and if this isn't yet your cup of tea, then just connect with your own positive motivation for doing the teaching. Sangye chudon zogi chunam la janchu badu dani kapsuchi daki chunyangi pe sonamgi drola penjir zange drupa sho sangye chudon zogi chunam la janchu badu dani kapsuchi daki chunyangi pe sonamgi Rola penjir sange drupa sho sange chudon sogi chunam la janchu padu dani kapsuchi dagi chunyan gi pe sonam gi rola penjir sange drupa sho. Just letting that motivation connect and stabilize. Okay, so we are session 1, and session 1, we're going to make sure everyone's on the same page about bodhicitta and bodhisattvas and dig into as much of the text as we can, given that. Before we get into those details, can someone give me a brief explanation of what bodhicitta and a bodhisattva is, just to kind of see where the group is at in terms of terms? I won't belabor the point if you guys are already totally across it, but it might be a new terms for some of you. So bodhicitta, bodhisattvas, tell me some things about those words. Doesn't have to be technical. What are they?
Bodhicitta, mind of awakening, aspiring to awaken for the benefit of all.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yep. And then a bodhisattva?
A person who's doing that.
Nice. Nice. Yep. Yep. And, you know, it seems self-evident probably to most of us who've been in Buddhist circles a long time, but these words get bandied about. And if you don't really have a deep connection of what's being referred to, then you'll miss the point of the whole text. Okay. So I think all of you have received a copy of the text by email, and it probably is a PDF that looks something like this. And if not, I'm sure Laura will send it to you after the class. So this particular version has the translation that's from Soze Ge as well as Stephen Batchelor. It's a very poetic rendering of the text, which I think really helps you connect to it. There are many other translations as well, some of them very literal, some of them very technical. It's probably one of the most translated texts of Tibetan Buddhism into English, and I should say of the Nalanda tradition of India. So you'll find variation is the upshot of all of this, but this particular one is quite user-friendly. All right, so here's the table of contents. And the table of contents kind of shows you what we're up to. Basically, what are the benefits of the mind of enlightenment? The mind of enlightenment being bodhicitta. And then confessing negativities, then completely upholding the mind of enlightenment. Then we get into the 6 perfections and dedicate. And so some of these are very what you would expect, like relying on patience. Chapter 6 is very much about patience and about working with people who trigger anger and working with your own suffering. And it's very straightforward what you would expect. But some of them you would think are referring to something else because it'll take a pivot or it'll take a real dramatic sort of turn into a deep examination of broader motivations and broader afflictions than just the particular one that perfection is seeking to address. So some of these chapters are very straightforward and some of them definitely need commentary because without commentary, they're easy to misunderstand. Okay. So, chapter 1, benefits of the mind of enlightenment. Starts out classic. Homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Respectfully, I pay homage to the Sagatas who are endowed with the Dharmakaya, as well as to their children and to all who are worthy of homage. Here I shall describe how to engage in the vows of the Sugata's children, the meaning of which I have summarized in accordance with the scriptures. So here we already have a few epithets for Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. When we're saying Sugatas, we're referring to fully enlightened beings. When we say Dharmakaya, we mean the mind of all holy beings, the wisdom body. When we say their children, we don't literally mean their children, we mean bodhisattvas, those who are on their way to enlightenment. So when you see these words, they'll be peppered throughout the text. Don't be thrown by the flowery language. So homage, right? The whole concept of homage or prostration. This is a very standard way of starting a text like this, and it might kind of bring up all sorts of questions like, why? Who am I prostrating to? Why am I prostrating? Why am I showing and saying homage or homage? You know, why do we have prostrations? What are all these ideas about in Buddhism? And how is it the same? And how is it different to other religious traditions? So when we say homage, or I pay homage, or I make a prostration, what we're really saying is I am respecting my own mind's potential. And I am respecting those who have developed their mind's potential, both. And the underlying psychology is you become receptive to what you respect. So by reminding yourself that you respect something, you immediately kind of perk up energetically and listen more deeply. It's like creating a sacred space or like creating a beautiful table setting for a big party. You're creating ambiance and atmosphere so that whatever enters into that container has more significance. It's highlighted for us in some way. Yeah. And it makes you lean in. It makes you lean in and really listen deeply. We're flagging this is more important than an everyday conversation. So we're becoming receptive to what we respect. This is the underlying psychology of a homage or a prostration. And it's not saying me lower, you higher. It's more of an idea of I'm aspiring to this thing I'm looking up to. But the very aspiration implies that you will be there too, that you're not less than, you're just in your developmental process, that you have all of the same ingredients and criteria for becoming fully awakened as those who have actually applied the ingredients and become fully awakened. Yeah. So when you read these things, just kind of sit with, it's not about bowing and scraping and subjugating yourself or self-loathing or martyrdom or any of those ideas that might flag, sort of red flags for you. It's not about that at all. One piece it is trying to do is address your pride. And all of us do have quite a lot of pride. And pride is the best friend of self-loathing. It's not the best friend of self-confidence. So when we're having this idea of prostration and homage, we're also a little bit, poking the fact that our pride thinks it already knows everything. Yeah. And when you think you already know everything, you become a little bit fragile because now you have to prove it, or you're scared that people will confront you on it. You get a little bit defensive. You don't listen as deeply. If you go into a situation thinking, I am listening and I'm a beginner, so much more relaxing. So much more relaxing. The Zen mind, beginner's mind. Yeah. So that attitude of humility in Buddhism should accompany healthy self-confidence, which realizes your mind's potential is incredibly vast. Its potential to be trained is unbelievable. So have deep conviction in that. Feel strong identification with your own potential. Then what you know or you don't know isn't such an identity feature. Yeah? You know the things you've come across and have had the experiences to reinforce. You don't know the things you haven't learned yet. Simple as that. But what pride says is the things I know are mine. Yeah. And also the things I know are me. And so if someone says you don't know everything, then immediately you start to feel deficient and slide into some sort of self-loathing. So what we're trying to kill right off the bat is the idea that you should know anything about these ideas already, even though, of course, you do know lots of ideas about these things already. Yeah, you're just kind of going in fresh. And every time I study this text or read this text or teach this text, I try to come at it from fresh eyes and really see how is it resonating today? Where is it landing today? And what are new areas of depth I can connect to when coming back to my old friend, this guide to a Bodhisattva's way of life? Yeah. Okay. So digging in, we're going to talk a little bit about the genre of teachings that this text falls under, and I'm going to quote from this book, In Praise of Great Compassion, by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thubten Chodron. It's from this Library of Wisdom and Compassion series. It's volume 5, and I really recommend this series if you guys haven't found it yet. It's just brilliant and very clearly laid out. So they say, although the purpose of all the Buddhist teachings is to train the mind, there arose in Tibet a special set of teachings called mind training or thought transformation, Lozang. It was developed by the Kadampa Geshes, disciples of Atisha and Dom Trompa, beginning around the 12th century, but its textual roots are in Nagarjuna's Precious Garland and Shantideva's Engaging in the Bodhisattva's Deeds, as well as these various sutras directly from the Buddha. So this Lozang mind training or thought transformation set of teachings got really popular around the 12th century, but they actually have their roots in the very teachings of the Buddha 2,600 years ago, as well as being really highlighted by Nagarjuna in his precious garland, and Shantideva engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, the text that we're studying. So that text that we're studying was actually written around the 8th century, way before. So it's an ancient, ancient text. Here's verse 4. So Shantideva says, the leisures and endowments are hard to find, since they accomplish the purposes of beings. If I do not accomplish benefit upon this, how will I acquire this in future? So leisures and endowments is a phrasing that you hear a lot in the stages of the path teachings, and it's referring to something very specific about a unique type of human life. That right now our human life is not just a regular human life, but it's what's called a perfect human rebirth. And all of the characteristics for having a perfect human rebirth are very, very hard to assemble. But once you have them, you have everything you need in order to develop your mind for the welfare of all sentient beings. But if you don't, how will you do it in future? So right off the bat, Shantideva is saying to us, remember your amazing good fortune. Remember how much positive karma you would have had to have accumulated in past lives in order to have what you have now. How very rare it is for it to come together like this. And if you don't do something with it, then when will you? When will it ever be any better than this? So if not you, then who? Right? If not now, then when? And so these leisures and endowments are referring to being free from being a hell being or someone who is dominated by pain, fear, and hatred. You're free from being a hungry ghost, someone dominated by addiction and miserliness. You're free from being an animal, dominated by ignorance, fear, etc. You're free from being a celestial being, a god or a demigod, where you're so lost in pleasure it doesn't even occur to you to work for the welfare of sentient beings. So you have you're free from these 4 non-human states, and you're also free from the type of human states which make it very, very hard to practice a spiritual path. So you're not a human in a border region, meaning somewhere that is so isolated that there's no access to spiritual teachings or teachers. You're free from being born in a time where a Buddha hasn't descended. So Buddha Shakyamuni, of course, descended about 2,600 years ago, and there's been many, many Buddhas since and many Buddhas before, but his teachings are still around and accessible. You're also free from being a human being with the type of physical and mental obstacles that prevent independence, right? So it's not about having like perfect health or perfect mental health, but you have enough physical and mental health that you have a level of independence, able to get from point A to point B, able to access teachers, teachings, books, etc., and the mental capacity to process them in a healthy way. And this is really something that we can't minimize. It's a huge deal and also temporary. We're also free from being a human being with strongly held wrong views. For example, the wrong view that thinks that animal sacrifice would lead to liberation, for example. So we didn't grow up in the type of atmosphere where wrong views were really grilled into us, so much so that we believe them. So those 8 freedoms, some of you are familiar with this list. It's, old hat, and some of you might not have seen this list before. But when you're thinking of it, you're trying to really develop this mind that realizes that your life has one of the most perfect balances there could be of happiness and suffering. You've suffered enough. Yes, you've suffered enough in your life to be curious about the causes of suffering, to want to end suffering, to be able to see it in other people and have empathy. Yeah. People that have had incredibly easy lives might not have the same pathways of empathy that you do. They might not really understand what it's like to have grief or pain or loss in the same way that you have. And also, you're not so consumed with suffering that there's nothing you can do. You have a degree of health, you have a degree of resources and stability, You have friends and family around you somewhere, some way that are kind to you and you can feel human connection. You might have hobbies you like, you might have great food options in the fridge, you might have cute pets, you might have nice kids, whatever, etc., etc. But you're really thinking that your own life is a perfect life for the spiritual path. It's a perfect life for the spiritual path. Too much more suffering, you'd be consumed with suffering. But too much more pleasure, you'd be lost in pleasure. How does that sit for you? Does that have the ring of truth? Yeah, it's, and it's something that I think we take for granted a little bit because we often fall into, I wish it could be different, I wish it could be different, until you have a really good run of things going well, and then you just get distracted by things going well. And then something annoying, horrible, something in between happens, and then you kind of go back to your spiritual path for a little bit, get yourself kind of pieced together, and then go back to, I wish things were better, and kind of a habit of discontent of it's fine, but it could be better. It's fine, it could be better, you know? And you just kind of get a bit ho-hum about the way you view your own life rather than realizing, no, it's a perfect one for the spiritual path. It's a perfect one for the spiritual path. So let that touch you. And part of letting that touch you means that you really want to make the most of it. And you realize there are people out there who are probably smarter than us and kinder than us, but haven't gotten the same ingredients of happiness and suffering to be motivated to work on the spiritual path. So it's not about a value judgment, it's about a recognition of incredible causes and conditions coming together. And then you have a sense of responsibility. I need to use these. Do you have any questions so far or thoughts so far? Makes sense? Yeah. So whether you believe in the lower realms and the higher realms literally, or whether you like to think of them in terms of a metaphoric experience that you can see in human beings around you, either is fine. You can kind of leave that in ambiguity if it's more comfortable. Yeah, Brenda, go ahead.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
Good to see you.
Just a question about one word. It was where a time when no Buddha has descended. Why
Yep.
descended? Why do we think of Shakyamuni Buddha descending?
Like, is he up there?
Something like that.
Yeah.
The God realms or the
Yeah,
realm
right.
30 or whatever. Why descend?
I mean, it's kind of a poetic framing to imagine that the holy beings are literally above. It's like Buddhas pervade every atom of existence. The holy mind pervades every single atom of existence. And, it helps our minds to kind of have some sort of directional focus. Where are they? Where are they? Well, they're everywhere, but how about there? Yeah. So descended from the Pure Land of Tashita, for example, in a human form accessible for us to relate to. So descended could be in quotes, if that helps.
So that would kind of imply that Buddha Shakyamuni was in Tushita before taking birth as a prince in India.
Yeah, there's always two different views of who Buddha Shakyamuni was when he was on this planet in this form 2,600 years ago, right? There's some traditions think of the story very literally and think he very literally was a Indian Nepali prince, in a small fiefdom in that area in that time, and literally went through the 12 deeds of developing his mind to enlightenment. The other school of thought is that he already was enlightened and was waiting for the positive karma of the beings at that time to ripen. And then he descended and showed the aspect of doing these 12 deeds to show a certain teaching, So we had the life of a prince with all the indulgences and all the happiness and all of the pleasures and all of the etc. saw birth, old age, sickness, and death, became disillusioned, became a monk, got too far, went to and became an ascetic, then, et cetera, middle way, enlightenment, bing, the 12 deeds. Yes, we know the story.
Thank you.
Yeah, so whether it's a literal, like this was a person who started out a regular person and became enlightened, or he already was enlightened and showed the aspect of these stages, either way, the story is similar on the surface, and we are still living in a time where the teachings of one of those are existent. So that's the good news. That's the good news.
Thank you.
And I think the side note of all of this is that even if he already was a Buddha, when he descended to earth and showed these aspects, at some point he was a regular person just like us with afflictions and suffering. Yeah, at some point he was just like us. So all Buddhas started out just like us. Yeah, and that's part of the good news. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. And the other side of this list, these 10 opportunities, these are framed in terms of our own conditions and external conditions. So, okay, you're a human, but you're also in a central place in the sense that you're safe and you're free enough to pursue practice. You're also a human where there is the fourfold Sangha, and this may or may not be literally true in the area that you live, but it is true in the world. The fourfold Sangha is there are lay Buddhist women, lay Buddhist men, fully ordained monks, and fully ordained nuns. So the fourfold Sangha exists, and it's said that that's really the best composition for a community to have, is all four of those types of groups. And again, mental and physical independence. Reversible karma, meaning you haven't done something so negative that your very next life is destined to be a negative one. And I say destined very loosely because, of course, everything is purifiable. But an example of someone with irreversible karma is someone who killed their parents on purpose with anger, right? So if you have not killed your parents on purpose with anger, you have reversible karma. Good. Yay. Yes. Well done, team. And if you did, and, you were in prison and then you got out and now you're in your reconciliation phase of life, you can purify. So don't worry. Yeah. Other things that are, so heavy that unless you do radical purification, you'll definitely be reborn in a lower realm, are very unlikely for us to do as regular human beings with our regular mistakes, like causing a schism in the Sangha, making 4 or more members of the Sangha at the time of the Buddha separate from 4 or more other members, causing a great divide or split in a community. Yeah, that's very unlikely, et cetera, et cetera. So really what you're sitting with is we've made mistakes, but they haven't been cosmic mistakes. Yeah. And even if we were at one point in this very life a serial killer, please stop. But if you were, think of Milarepa and the story of Milarepa. He was a serial killer, met the spiritual path, met a teacher, and did incredible types of purification and became enlightened in one lifetime. So no one is a lost cause. But the thrust of this particular teaching is a little bit of a shift of how you relate to your own mistakes. Even the worst things you've done in your life, whatever betrayals, whatever, deceptions, whatever kind of things that you've done, they're purifiable, and also in the great scheme of things, not that bad. Yeah. Still purify them, and also they're within the range of normal human mistakes. Give yourself a break. Feel like you still have the freedom from having done the horrible, horrible things. And even if you've done the horrible, horrible things, those are purifiable as well. So it's just something interesting to sit with. I have reversible karma. I have karma that can be purified. That is amazing. Yeah, that really is amazing. We have conviction in the Dharma, and the Dharma in this sense could be any teachings of any religious or spiritual tradition that have ethics as their basis and altruism. So ethics in the sense of non-harmfulness, non-harmfulness. And altruism in the sense of wanting to work for the welfare of others, not being self-centered in your spiritual path. And so again, the Buddha has descended, the Buddha has taught, the teachings remain, there continues to be sincere practitioners, and there is caring for others. There's benefactors in community. So these last two, that there are sincere practitioners and there is caring for others, this is something also to just sit with and let nourish you. That you are not alone in trying to attempt this bold thing of developing your mind's potential. You're not alone. You've got companions on the path. You have people that have been practicing much longer. You've been with people who are very new to the path. And all of us together in community, even if it's remotely, even if it's online, we're holding each other much differently than if we were going it alone. So, I think there's something very profound about thinking about a spiritual community because it's different than a regular friend group. It's different than colleagues. It's different than family because there's something so deep that connects us. I don't know about you guys, but there is Dharma centers where I've known people for years and years and years. I know them so well. I know their heart. I know their ways. I have no idea what they do for a living. I don't know if they're married or not. I don't know how many kids they have, but I know them so well. I might not even know their last name, right? I know their first name and I know all these deep things about them, and we've shared so much experientially at our times together at Dharma centers. I don't really have a sense of what their hobbies are. And those things like, what do they do for a living? Are they married or not? What's their kid pet situation? What are their hobbies? Those seem like the ingredients of life, right? But really, when you're in a spiritual community, you might wind up finding out those things, but they're kind of incidental. Yeah, because you have these deep things in common, these deep aspirations in common. And even being together on Zoom live, you feel this kind of palpable difference of here we are all in the mood for a deep conversation. How wonderful it is. Yeah, we're already community. We'll figure out each other's names later. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting thing to sit with of how much different it is to have a spiritual path that is shared, to not have to be all by yourself. And even if you are all by yourself in some remote location, because of technology, you really aren't. So let yourself feel held by community. It really makes a difference. Yeah. Okay, so that's what Shantideva is starting out by telling us is, remember, you've got this perfect human rebirth. Yes, these leisures and endowments, they're very hard to find. And since they accomplish the purposes of beings, if I do not accomplish benefit upon these resources, how will I acquire it in future? So it's both a little bit carrot and a little bit stick. Yeah, this is wonderful. This is amazing. Don't waste it. Yeah. And similarly, this is another oft quoted verse. Just as a flash of lightning brightly illuminates for an instant within the clouds on a dark night, likewise in this world, through the might of the Buddha, merit and intelligence occasionally occur for once, right? Like we suddenly have our act together. Yeah. Hence, virtue or positive karma is perpetually feeble. The great power of negativities, horrible. Except for the mind of complete enlightenment, by what other virtue will it be overcome? So negativities, virtue, virtue, virtue. These are, again, kind of like religious sounding terms. But when we say virtue or merit or good karma, think beneficial actions of body, speech, and mind, things that are working for the greater good. Yeah. And when we say negativities, or bad karma, and occasionally even old translators will say sin, and then everybody cringes with their, religious trauma, right? But when you hear these words, remember it's referring to destructive actions of body, speech, and mind, things that harm yourself and others. Yeah. So of course we do things that harm ourselves and others, but by describing them in this way, it's putting it under the frame of, but it's not what I want to continue. Why are they so strong? Because they're habitual. They're just habitual. If we want to change them, we can work on the symptoms of them and the habits of them, and also we can work on the fundamental causes for them, that innate ignorance. So whether you're just kind of doing damage control and prevention and, symptoms relief, or whether you've got the mental space for the deep dive, any effort you put into trying to overcome these negative habits is just remarkable. Yeah, like a flash of lightning in the dead of night. So treasure it when you have a moment of clarity, when you have a moment of focus. Okay. Questions so far? Thoughts so far? Did I lose anybody? Okay. Okay. So back to this idea of Lozang, or mind training thought transformation, as was said in the previous section, was developed by the Kadampa Geshis, disciples of Atisha and Dom Trompa, beginning in the 12th century, has its textual roots in Nagarjuna and Shantideva. And what you're really trying to touch is how to use negative circumstances to develop into the spiritual path. So in chapter 3 are some of the really beautiful verses that get quoted all the time, like, may I be a doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. May a rain of food and drink descend to clear away the pain and thirst and hunger during the eon of famine. May I change myself into food and drink. May I become an inexhaustible treasure for those who are poor and destitute. May I turn into all things they could need, and may these be placed close beside them. Without any sense of loss, I shall give up my body and enjoyments, as well as all my virtues of the 3 times, for the sake of benefiting all. So just kind of you're sitting with the beauty of this kind of poetry and the beauty of these aspirations and how much you would love to live in this way. And then let your common sense and your wisdom very gently challenge it and say, is it a good idea, without any sense of loss, to give up my body and my enjoyments, meaning resources, as well as my virtues or merit of the past, present, and future, for the sake of benefiting all? What does that actually mean? What would that actually look like? So you let yourself be inspired and say, yes, I love that. That's beautiful. May I live like this. And then holding that inspiration, start to poke at it with logic a little bit. So what we know is boundaries are helpful, right? Yes, boundaries are helpful. And that indulging people's negative habits is not in their best interest. So being an enabler is not helpful, even though people may like you for a minute. Yes. So if you indulge people's bad habits, they might kind of like you and feel happy in your presence, but you're not really doing them any good. If you let people take advantage of you and take you for granted and walk all over you, they might like you for a minute, not respect you very much, but enjoy taking advantage of you. But it ultimately does them no good, nor does it do you any good. It sounds a little bit like this is what Shantideva is inviting us to do, but it in no way is this. Lozang, thought transformation, is radical reframing, which is mental first. It's a mentality that gets away from me first thinking. It's a mentality that gets into collaboration and service and leadership as service and service as leadership. It gets into community mindedness. It gets into thinking us rather than me, us rather than them, just widening the radius of us. And then what is going to benefit us? So if you're thinking what is going to benefit us, then if you have 2 jackets, you give away one of your jackets. If you're being a martyr, you say, take my jacket too. Yeah, go the extra mile, shirt off the back. And that is a beautiful mentality, except what winds up happening is then you're cold and become a burden to someone else. Yes? So we're not taking this to an absurd extreme, but we are mentally adopting the attitude that we could and that we will. If you've ever read the Golden Light Sutra, the Golden Light Sutra is so beautiful, so profound. And there's a chapter towards the end, the chapter on the tigress, where the Buddha in one of his previous lives sees a starving mother tiger and her babies, and she's so starving that she's thinking about eating her own babies. And the Buddha in his previous life sees this, is overcome with compassion, and offers his own flesh to the tigress so that she won't eat her cubs. Yeah, and because he's a bodhisattva with uncontrived bodhicitta, he can happily, blissfully do so, and does. Yeah, and then later, those cubs are reborn as his students. Yes? Nice, beautiful, great. So, should we go into the forest and find ourselves a grizzly bear and be like, snack? Right? Should we? Let's all do it. Let's do it now. You want to? No, don't do it. It's a terrible idea. What would happen the second the grizzly bear started to eat your arm? You would go, oh, never mind. Sorry, no, never mind. Stop it. Yeah? You would immediately generate regret because, one, you don't have bodhicitta uncontrived. It's not uncontrived bodhicitta. So you have a beautiful compassion, but it doesn't have the same stability. Also, you don't have the omniscience or even just regular types of clairvoyance to know how is this action going to play out for the bear and for myself. Is it going to ripen as a beautiful teacher and student dynamic in the immediate future life? Or is it just going to be negative karma for the bear eating a human being and negative karma for me regretting generosity? And then my life is ended short, and I have less time to practice Dharma, and I might die in fear and pain, ripening negative seeds and have a negative rebirth and really delay my whole path. So you have to feel this tension as kind of a beautiful catalyst for inspiration, aspiration, and movement that says, I want to live in this way, but I can't live in this way yet. Yeah. I want to, and let that inspiration, aspiration build its own kind of energetic critical mass into movement to the next step of the path, which might just be giving away your extra jacket, right? Which seems like no big deal, but if you've got strong attachment to your possessions, is really beautiful that you could even start to think in that way. And if you have nothing material to offer, or you're not ready to have that relationship with your material goods, you think, what can I offer in terms of my time and my energy? How can I expand my capacity to be of benefit to others? Yeah, what are the things that are genuinely going to be of benefit to others that I can facilitate in a way that is very sensible pacing? Very sensible pacing. And if you ever read any of the teachings on joyous effort or the perfection of enthusiasm, what it says is to not overestimate your capacity and burn out, which sounds like good common sense, but it's also strategic. Because if you go past your capacity and burn out, the time it takes for you to recover, dust yourself up, pick yourself up, get back to it, start to develop the momentum you once had, is actually a far greater length of time and amount of energy than if you'd just been gently doing small things with consistency. So we need to a little bit underestimate our abilities, because the tendency of pride is to think of yourself on your best day and make your plans based on who you are at your best, rather than who you are at a baseline or a normal day. Or probably even more practically is to think, what is the most I can do on a terrible day? And that will be the baseline of what I do every single day. What can I do on a terrible day? And then you have many normal days and some really good days. Do more if you want to, but you're not feeling that sense of, I failed myself. You're not burning out. It can be humbling, it can be sobering to acknowledge how very little we can do with consistency, but that is a maturity, to see yourself more accurately. To say, maybe after 20 years of being a Buddhist, all I can do is 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation and a short bodhicitta motivation. Maybe that's all I can do after 20 years. And you know what? That's fantastic. Do that. Yeah, because you're forgetting that, during your daily life, all of your interactions have been colored by the teachings you've been to, the thoughts that you've had, the conversations you've engaged with. You are developing on the path. Meditation is only one part of it. Don't give it all the airtime or all the attention. Give it the amount that you have the capacity to hold without giving it so much emphasis that if you're not doing it the way you think you should, that means you're not practicing. By all means, expand and grow your meditation practice, but don't feel like that's the only component of practice. Yeah, so you're just very, very gently weaving more into your daily life mindfulness that's conditioned by bodhicitta. You're very gently weaving in more things to your meditation practice, but it has to be such a sustainable pace. Sustainable pace. And, you'll overestimate, fall on your face, need to kind of get re-inspired many times, it's quite normal. And try not to lose the lesson each time that you do that. Don't lose the lesson of it. Okay. So a little bit more, and then we'll have a little stretch and maybe meditation. Okay, so the summary of all this is to say all Mahayana mind training, Lozang, is practiced with the purpose of developing and enhancing bodhicitta. Okay, so this whole text, the point of this whole text and all the texts of this genre is for developing and enhancing bodhicitta. Okay, so relative bodhicitta, the awakening mind, as Brenda so beautifully said, it's the altruistic intention to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. This awakening mind is characterized by an objective, the full awakening of Buddhahood, and a purpose, the fulfillment of others' welfare. All right, so another way to say that, it's the main Mahayana motivation, to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So these aspirations become a main mind or a primary consciousness through merit, study, deep conviction, repetition, meditation, so many different things to move this from being a thought or a state of mind that comes and goes into something that is stably present in your mind all the time, conditioning all of your thoughts. It's mainly repetition. So a Mahayanist goal is to become a complete Buddha. You have to keep returning to that motivation for it to stick and for it to deepen. And then ultimate or absolute bodhicitta is again the main Mahayana motivation with two aspirations: to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. And this is in the mind of someone who has realized emptiness directly / perceptually, meaning an Arya being or someone on the path of seeing. So having realized emptiness directly. So this is non-conceptual, and it is someone who also understands that this is a characteristic that all phenomena have. People, things, situations, etc. So remember that emptiness refers to the absence of inherent existence. It's a philosophical view. It sounds like nihilism. It is not nihilism. All right, keep remembering that. So ultimate bodhicitta is bodhicitta in the mind of someone who has realized emptiness. Okay, so all Mahayana mind training is practiced with the purpose of preventing and eliminating self-grasping and self-cherishing, right? So if its purpose is to develop bodhicitta, its purpose is also to prevent self-grasping and self-cherishing. Okay. So these twin demons, which are just, habits of your mind, right? Self-cherishing and self-grasping. Self-cherishing is the deeply ingrained thought that cherishes the welfare of your own self and makes you oblivious to others' well-being. It's one of the twin demons that lie within our heart and serve as the source of all misfortune and downfall. Self-grasping is instinctively believing in the intrinsic or inherent existence of your own self, as well as of the external world. Self here means a substantial, truly existent entity. The wisdom that realizes emptiness eliminates this self-grasping. So these two thoughts, self-cherishing and self-grasping, are the primary focus of combat in the mind training Lozang practice. Okay, so if self-cherishing is antidoted by relative bodhicitta, self-grasping is antidoted by ultimate bodhicitta. Yeah, and this is kind of the synopsis of everything we're up to in the whole text. And it's good to get clear on what we're talking about as the enemy. The enemy is not yourself. The enemy is self-cherishing and self-grasping, which are thoughts that arise in your mind due to innate ignorance. Okay, so in Shantideva's text, there is a lot of very aggressive language that seems to sound like self-harm or self-denigration, and it's not. Because what he's at war with are the tendencies and habits of self-cherishing and self-grasping, which sometimes need aggressive methods to overcome, sometimes need stealthy methods to overcome, sometimes sweet poetry, sometimes fierce logic, sometimes absolute shutdown, sometimes tons of words. We have to hit it from so many angles to overcome these habits, don't we? We all want to be nice people, but we're not. How come? Habit. What are the habits driven by? Self-cherishing, self-grasping. So all throughout the text, when you're hearing anything that sounds a little bit full on, no, the enemy is self-cherishing and self-grasping, that actually a practitioner or a bodhisattva or an aspiring bodhisattva has very strong self-confidence, confidence in their potential. Right, any questions before we take a little break? Are those the basic term flood, was that clear enough to work with? Did I lose anybody with the terms? Yeah, good. Good. Okay, great. All right, let's have a 15-minute break. 15-minute break. Okay, see you soon. All right, everybody back? Great. Okay, so hopefully we're convinced that bodhicitta is a good idea and that self-cherishing and self-grasping are unfortunate, generally on board. Also hopefully on board with the idea that we have a perfect human rebirth and it's rare, it's precious, hard to obtain, easy to lose. Let's make the most of it. These general themes sitting well with you, or are you feeling any resistance or interesting new ideas that you hadn't thought of about them before? Does anyone feel comfortable to share how these ideas are landing for you so far?
I think when days are going well and you're not in pain, you don't feel sick, and you've not got a migraine, then yeah, you go, oh yeah, this is good, this is great. And then sometimes you just have days where you think, yeah, just like, no, it's just miserable. And you have to really kind of fight with the logic of it at times.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And, you know, and even just that working knowing that you have, that it's easier to be kind when you feel well, when you feel happy. It is easier. And then when you see other people badly behaved, you think, ah, they must be suffering. Like myself when I'm a bugger, you know? So that is also a helpful, just kind of like immediately expand the human experience, you know, immediately widen the gaze. This is what self-cherishing does to us, is it narrows our focus. And when we have pain and suffering, and whether it's mental or physical or both, self-cherishing is so happy to co-opt it and say, here's more reasons to think only of yourself. because we have to look after you, you poor dear. We must look after you, you know? And then you're like, yes, yes, I must be looked after. Yes. And it's true, you should be looked after. And under the influence of self-cherishing, it will never be enough. Yeah, everyone could treat you perfectly. They could give you all the delicious foods and blankies and entertainments and validations and all of the comforts, all of the kittens, all of the puppies, all of the things. And when attachment minds are activated, you're just in this more please, more please, more please. That was nice, but it's not enough. And so sort of watching your mind under the influence of self-cherishing, even if you can't do anything about it, is very useful for the spiritual path. Watching yourself have resistance, watching yourself get a collapsed focus, a narrowing of focus. And then when you sort of feel like you've shaken your head clear of it, you know, physically or mentally or both, and you're thinking of others easily and genuinely, also to notice that spaciousness that accompanies it and that relaxation that accompanies it, that cherishing others, that leading to bodhicitta feeling is actually in your own best interest and is one of the kindest things you can do for yourself. Doesn't feel like it in the moment of pain, but I always think about the ways in which a problem feels bigger if it's my problem. If I'm thinking about the greater good or the collective or who I can be working with, and there's that same exact problem, it's no big deal. It sort of shrinks to its correct proportion. It doesn't mean it disappears, it just goes to its correct proportion. So that narrowing of focus is what we want to watch for. If we're noticing that self-cherishing often clouds my vision, often co-ops my day, what does it look like? What is the visceral, palpable, lived experience of self-cherishing driving everything? It's that narrowing of focus. And as soon as we're thinking of others, there's an expansion and widening of focus. So, you know, other things you can find when your self-cherishing is really up is that you get excessively specific about your needs. So you have needs like you have to sleep enough and you have to eat enough and you have to move enough. Yes? Fine, no worries. You have a body, do those things. When you have self-cherishing really up, you get very particular. I can only eat these things at this time, and not out of a genuine dietary understanding or some sort of understanding of your physiology or nourishing your gut biome, but out of self-cherishing. It becomes really specific, and it's like it has to be at this time and at this temperature and on these plates, right? And served with a smile. You know, that's just America. But it's it's an interesting thing to see. When do you get really specific, really tight? Yeah. Self-cherishing often says things like, I can only be happy if, or it's fine if only blah, blah, blah. And there's just always this blank to fill in. And even when it gets filled in, it just recalibrates and finds something else. So I often think of times where I was in pain, but happy anyway, as a way to challenge the self-cherishing that arises when I'm struggling. So, you know, I often think of like if I've had an amazing conversation with someone and also had a headache that day, or I really was like really into a book and it was just one of those amazing meaty books and you just fell right into it, but you had a flu. You didn't care that you had the flu, you were in the book. You didn't care that you had the migraine, you were in the conversation. Those things existed and they had some part of your attention, but they didn't come forefront. When it comes forefront and just becomes the focus, you know that self-cherishing is driving. And it's so difficult because, of course, also self-care is so important. And self-care is something that a lot of us have to learn because we were told to subjugate the needs of our body and our mind to be of benefit to others in a worldly way. To be a good girl or a good boy or a good citizen or a good partner or a good sister or a good mother or whatever. We were taught to not listen to our body, to not listen to our mind, to put others first in a way that is martyred. So finding that delicate balance of who am I nourishing? What am I nourishing? Am I nourishing this body as a vehicle this mind as its amazing potential to develop? Or am I nourishing something that's performative or perfunctory or something like that, you know? And it just takes a little bit of being a scientist to your own experience and just kind of checking. But a very good litmus test, if it's a negative motivation and a negative sort of drive, is if there is an agitation involved. Yeah, that's the definition of an affliction, really, is that which makes the mind unpeaceful. So when you have this disturbance in the body and mind, and that seems to be driving decision making, that's when our little red flags should go up and say, perhaps don't make choices under the influence of this experience. Let's give it a minute. You might come to the same conclusions, but it'll be from a stabler place and it'll have more sort of positive long-term outcome, I guess. Yeah. 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 Other thoughts and questions? Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
One of the thoughts I had was that this the human endowments, etc. Having never thought of myself as being particularly privileged, it's one of the things that has made me see how privileged I am to be born where I am, as I am, in this time. You know, had I been born several hundred years ago, my life would be a lot harder, I suspect. And then that gives you a certain responsibility to do something with it, I think. But I'd never, when I was growing up, I never thought of myself as privileged at all. But now I think these kind of texts have really helped me see how much I have been given just through an accident of birth. So gratitude
Yeah,
for it.
we created the causes, you know, like thank your past self. You know, she did good work. He did good work. They did good work. Good work was done. Right. And, you know, and also everyone has created causes like that and not necessarily have they ripened. So in a way it is as if chance, even though you created the causes, we've created so many causes. Why did this collection ripen when? It's a dependent arising, you know, and so really having that sense of deep gratitude. And if it's not coming naturally, take yourself as you are right now and kind of put yourself into just a slightly different situation and ask yourself how you'd function. Or remember different times in your life where circumstances were tweaked and how much harder it was to be kind or whatever. I mean, I used to work half the year in the Middle East, and it was before the war. And just doing my regular everyday practice in my little, nice little apartment, which was in a sweet little village where there was nothing obviously going on wrong, just the instability of that area and the constant fear and anger of that area, it was harder to just sit still. You know, and then you go to somewhere like Land of Joy and it's just like peaceful and idyllic. And no doubt, just down the road is probably someone undergoing a domestic violence situation and someone having some like malnourishment issues and animals being not cared for correctly. No doubt there is suffering in the area. But the amount and the depth and the consistency of it being different means it's much easier to sit still there. And it's much easier to go deeply there because the agitation of the area isn't the same. So, I mean, conditions affect us. And we might think, oh, I live, you know, in whatever town or whatever city or whatever village. It doesn't seem particularly amazing, but just treasure the safety and the stability that's there. You know, we just had an ice storm here in Oregon, and I hadn't particularly met the neighbors yet, and people were just so kind as everybody's cars were slipping off the road, and you know, it was so difficult to get anywhere, and people with the four-wheel drives were like taking groceries to people, and you know, people I was feeling a little bit unsure of. It was kind of like, who cares? We're all struggling. Let's do our best to help each other out of this mess. And it was just beautiful to see. And mostly people do rise to the occasion, but sometimes there's just too much suffering to consider your neighbors. It's hard enough to even consider your own family. You're just trying to get yourself through the day. So, however perfect human rebirth can land with you, it's an incredibly important teaching. And because it's so obvious intellectually, it's hard to let it touch you. So try and find creative ways to let it touch you, because it will give you that kind of fuel you need for progress. Yeah, it's so important. Even if it's as simple as, however bad things are now, they might get worse because I'm just aging. Give yourself a little goose there. You're like, well, if my knees hurt now, imagine how much they'll hurt in 10 years if I'm lucky enough to live that long. Sit still, and also add a cushion, like don't make life harder than it has to be, but, just keep like, yeah, gently, but not too passive, I guess, is the point of all this. Don't be too passive and don't take for granted these circumstances. Really lean into them. And when you're thinking of how other people have it worse, don't let it suck you into, I'm so bad because I don't take advantage of my life. Just let it be a real honest recognition of, wow, it's up to me. I've got to practice because not everyone has these opportunities. Yeah, it's got to be me, little old me with my foibles and my inconsistencies and my idiosyncrasies, little old me. I better get the job done because not everyone has had the same comings together of conditions. Yeah, any other thoughts before we dig into some bodhicitta techniques? Okay, well, we'll look at some ways to develop bodhicitta, and then we'll do a meditation that goes with it. And next time, we'll go more into specific verses and specific sections. So, all right, so we were looking at these two buggers. And if we think of the text in general, generally it's laid out related to the perfections or the paramitas. And most of you know these, but just to flag one more term, sorry to overterm you, but one more term. The 6 perfections are aspirations and activities directed towards achieving Buddhahood. Someone with uncontrived bodhicitta is called a bodhisattva. Yeah, so just kind of hang on to those points and remember this bit. Yes, this is the main bit. Bodhicitta, the mind, spirit, or heart of enlightenment. It's the main Mahayana motivation, the altruistic mind that seeks enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. Bodhicitta. The whole text is about bodhicitta. And bodhicitta there's ultimate and relative, right? But relative bodhicitta is also divided into aspiring and engaging. And this is the first couple chapters in Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life are about aspiring bodhicitta and engaging bodhicitta. And basically the difference is just like the desire to go and actually going. So I want to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, shifts into I will become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, and I'm actively engaged in practices to develop that. So when Lozang was taken up by all the Tibetan traditions, the mind training texts center on the development of the 2 bodhicittas, conventional bodhicitta, which is the altruistic intention, and ultimate bodhicitta, the wisdom realizing emptiness. They especially emphasize cultivating bodhicitta by means of equalizing and exchanging self for others. And both are written in pithy, straightforward style that aims directly at the self-centered attitude, self-cherishing, and self-grasping, the 2 principal enemies of bodhicitta. Okay, so mind training teachings eviscerate these hindrances and call out their ridiculous logic that leads to misery and replaces it with a realistic perspectives. The advice the mind training texts give us is the opposite of what self-centered attitude and self-grasping demand. And their recommended actions are the opposite of what our afflicted mind wants to do at that moment. So, of course, that is what makes them so effective at quelling afflictions and protecting us from negativities. But the main point of all this is to say, combating self-cherishing is going to feel counterintuitive, particularly when you're really stuck in it. So, just kind of like feel the resistance and play with it a little bit, because it's not easy, and that's part of why it's changing you. So we might be used to this process of developing bodhicitta, this gratitude catalyst one called the 7-fold cause and effect. or the 6 causes and 1 effect, depending on your translator. And it's the one where you're recognizing all sentient beings as having been your mother, recalling their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, which develops into love, compassion, great compassion, and bodhicitta. So this is the one that's very commonly taught. The equalizing and exchanging is the one very much highlighted in these Lozang texts, and it's a little bit more logic-based, less gratitude-based, although of course they influence each other. So for both of them, the foundation is equanimity. And for this one, what you do is you think first about equality. Okay, all sentient beings are equal how? They're equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, and in many other ways. You think of the logic of numbers. Okay, so we are one and others are many. So it's silly that all of our time is spent thinking of just one when others are many. And then you think very specifically of the disadvantages of self-cherishing for yourself, when you see it in others, when you see it in the world, just really going to town on why is this a problematic worldview? And then you switch and you think of the positives of cherishing others. What happens to you when you're thinking of others more than yourself? What happens when others are thinking of others more than themselves? What happens in the world? What happens in policy decisions, et cetera, et cetera? And you land very organically on deciding to exchange self-cherishing for cherishing others. And then you do the actual exchange, which is Tonglen, this giving and taking practice, which leads to and reinforces bodhicitta. So this is the meditation that we'll do, and I'll just tell you some things about it so that you don't go in completely cold. So the Tonglen indicator verse, for lack of a better word, there's one in chapter 10, verse 2. Shantideva says, however many sick people there are, suffering in body and mind in all directions, due to my merit, may they obtain an ocean of happiness and joy. So a verse like this may seem to go in contradiction to the teachings on karma, because the teachings on karma say that you cannot transfer merit or negativities, that your karma is your own. Yeah, the mental continuum that created the karma is the mental continuum that will experience the results of it. We don't experience the results of things we haven't created. So it's important to know that this is not standing in opposition to karma. This is inviting a mental attitude. So you're thinking, okay, sick people, suffering in body, suffering in mind, all directions, the ones I can think of specifically, all of the other ones as well. May they have all the good karma I created and experience happiness and joy. This is the mental attitude of Tonglen. And it's kind of an interesting psychology. Lots of us have heard teachings on Tonglen, giving and taking, before. And I think that generally people get the idea, but it's good to kind of unpack it a little bit. And if you have ideas that you've heard from other teachers or from your own practice, please add them in. But basically what you're saying is all of the suffering in my life came from self-cherishing. May I give it back to self-cherishing. All of the happiness in my life came from sentient beings. May I give it back to sentient beings. How? Why? Unpacking. Okay. All of the suffering in my life came from self-cherishing. We say, okay, yes, and self-grasping, yes. So what happened is you did a destructive action of body, speech, or mind, or all three, or whatever, yeah. You did a negative action, planted a karmic seed on your mental continuum. It was hanging out there. Then you met with conditions, whether it was an illness, or it was a cold day, or it was a critical statement, whatever it was, you met with a condition, and that watered the seed of your negative action from the past. It ripened as suffering. So it looks like the critical words or the bad temperature or the illness or whatever it was gave you the suffering, but actually it was just the condition, wasn't it? And the tendency of self-cherishing is to oversimplify and say, I'm suffering because of your words, right? And just make it really way too simplistic. Even if you don't believe in karma, you know, if you had heard those same words on a different day in a different mood, it would have landed differently. If you'd heard those same words but from someone else, it would have landed differently. If you had heard them at a different stage in your life, it would have been experienced differently. You already know the words themselves did not give you suffering, but self-cherishing likes to oversimplify and say, it's your fault, I feel this way. Which we should think of as very disempowering. Yeah, we just gave all the power to that person and their words to deprive us of happiness. They didn't even necessarily want that power. Maybe they did in the moment of their affliction, but yeah, we just gave them all the power to take our happiness. Let's not do that, right? Also, we created the cause to experience this kind of interaction. If this person was in such a bad mood and was gonna speak critically in a harmful, critical way, and we hadn't created the cause to experience that, they would have done it to someone else. Right? They might have still done it. That's their own bag. They got to deal with their own stuff. They got to cut that out. That's their path. But it wouldn't have landed on us unless we created the cause. Also that piece, right? So we're thinking that the conditions we experience and the reactions we have to it, they are coming from our own mental seeds. Other people still need to have accountability for their negative actions. They still need to work on their own stuff. But we're really sitting with, at some point in some lifetime, I was that guy. I did that thing. And it might be that it was a very tiny version. And because of the nature of karma, it expanded. Because I didn't purify it, it just kept expanding and expanding and expanding. Right? So it could be that you did a minor stealing and then someone, stole your whole car. Right? And you've never stolen a car in any of your lifetimes. And in most of your lifetimes, there were no such thing as cars, right? But you stole something at some point, didn't purify it, and it magnified into something of yours being stolen that was large. Okay, so we understand karma generally-ish, yes, how it works. The attitude that we're adopting is all of the suffering that sentient beings experience is the ripening result of their negative karma, but I want it. I want all of their negative karma. I can't take it, but I want it anyway. Yeah. My own sickness, my own mental unease, my own difficulties. I want my own ones. I want them voluntarily, not just today's, but tomorrow's and the rest of my lifetimes. I want all of my own sufferings, and I'm going to take it and give it to the self-cherishing thought. And I'm going to explode that feeling of protection around my heart, which is actually a shield that blocks its expansion. Yeah. It's like, it's a poetic framing, but do you understand the idea, right? Self-cherishing kind of covers your good, kind heart, and it feels like a shield. It feels like a protection, but it's actually like a big walnut shell covering it and kind of suffocating your good, kind heart. So when you breathe the suffering into that negative feeling, it starts to weaken it. What actually releases your heart. Yeah, releases your good, kind heart. And then all happiness came from sentient beings. Well, that feels like a terrible attitude to think, right? That's just going to make your people-pleasing tendencies even worse. No, your happiness came from sentient beings in the sense of interaction. So you had a positive state of mind or a positive verbal action or a positive physical action in response to a person, right? Whether real or imagined in front of you or not, you had a response to a person and thought, may you be well, may you be happy, may I help you, may I assist you in some way. You had a thought, and that planted a positive mental seed on your mental continuum, which ripened as happiness. So the happiness you're experiencing could have only come about if you had had an interaction or some relation to another sentient being. So they didn't give you the happiness, but they were conditioned for you giving yourself the happiness. So it's as if they did. So are you feeling this kind of like interesting logic? Yeah, and really you're adopting this attitude again and again, and you eventually let a visualization ride on the breath, where on the very in-breath you're taking on suffering, on the out-breath you're giving happiness. In-breath, overcoming self-cherishing, out-breath, cherishing others. The essence of this is love and compassion. Yeah, compassion wishes others to be free from suffering. Love wishes them to have happiness. Just letting these two ride on the breath in whatever simple or elaborate form you like. If you want a visualization, use the visualization of black smoke going in, golden light coming out. But it should feel counterintuitive. Because what is your intuition conditioned by? Your intuition is conditioned. It's not a magical sort of ability that you have, it's a habit response. Your intuition's been conditioned by self-cherishing. So of course it's going to feel a little bit like, oh, I don't want to. But you're not actually breathing in black smoke, right? You're not standing in front of the campfire going, right? That's a terrible idea. Don't do that. But if you visualize it, it actually triggers that kind of resistance of, I don't want to, that self-cherishing says when you need to be of benefit to someone and your self-cherishing is trying to talk you out of it with all sorts of me first logics. Did I lose anybody? You with me? So this all develops bodhicitta, right? You just keep expanding and expanding and expanding, and, you know, kind of peripherally or adjacent to all of these thoughts comes an understanding of interdependence. Yeah, the way in which we have such an influence on each other, but not the way that we thought we did. The influence we have on each other is deep, deep layers of interconnection. And in a way, we had made it too simple. You give me happiness, come close. You give me suffering, go away. And we got really basic and coarse with our thinking and misunderstood causation. And yet, there is an influence on our happiness and suffering related to sentient beings. And what we're trying to do is take a deeper level of responsibility and accountability, as well as joy and connection when relating to others. Yeah, from a really deep, genuine place. So it's an interesting thought experiment. And whether you do the meditation or not, it's an interesting thought experiment. So we'll unpack it a little and then we'll just sit and do it, okay? Any worries or ideas before we do that? No? Seems like you guys are pretty much old hat in these thinkings, or at least quick, quick connectors. Okay. So equalizing and exchanging self for others does not require seeing ourselves as having been the recipient of kindness in a privileged relationship with sentient beings in the past. Rather, we connect with them on a more fundamental level. Each of us wants happiness and not suffering. Thus, this method enables us to see the kindness of enemies without first transforming their appearance into someone pleasing, such as that of a relative. The reasoning used by equalizing and exchanging self for others also brings in an understanding of ultimate truth, emptiness. What we designate I and cherish, and what we call other and neglect, is not based on some inherent nature that I and others have. I and others are dependent on each other. They are also seen as mere designations, which loosens our grasping itself. So for these reasons, equalizing and exchanging self for others is seen as a more profound method that is directed towards disciples with sharp faculties. Okay, this is from Yangzi Rinpoche. He says, in order to cherish others from the depths of your heart, you must have the wish to benefit them. It doesn't mean that whatever you do has to bear fruit, right? Wanting to benefit them doesn't mean you have to see that they've been benefited, right? So at this point, whether the intended result arises or not is secondary, as long as you have the sincere wish to help others. In this world, all of the great beings, from Buddha to Manjushri to Maitreya to Nagarjuna, from all of the great Indian masters to the great Tsongkhapa himself, have achieved their greatness on the basis of renouncing self and cherishing others. All of their accomplishments have been based on this mentality. Okay, So here's the steps. We're going to equalize. We're going to become convinced. We're going to understand, exchange, take, etc. Bodhicitta. Okay, so when we do this process, some people lose the thread if they just listen, and so it helps to see something on the screen. So I'll have things on the screen, but if you work fine just using your ears, close your eyes and do the meditation that way. So this will be an analytical meditation, unless it's really, really new to you, in which case just let it be a reflection and read along. Yeah, so those of you who are familiar, just close your eyes, go straight in. Those of you that are newer, you can read along too. So however works, but don't be distracted by the things on the screen if you don't need them. Okay. So first, just come to your body posture. And settle, nice straight back. Feeling stability behind you. Soft receptivity in front of you. So the back of your back feels very strong, and the front of you and your torso feels very soft with nothing held in. You can take a few deep intentional breaths just to settle at your own speed. And right now, just be in the body as a compassionate witness to your own physical experience. Just notice what's going on with your body with a gentle gaze, encouraging balance, but not forcing anything. And bring back your motivation. I'm doing this meditation and this class in order to develop my mind to its fullest potential so that I can be of greatest benefit to all living beings. And I'm held by my refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, particularly the teachings that help me protect myself from my own suffering and from harming others. So just be with that motivation of refuge and bodhicitta in words that resonate for you. And so start with an equanimity reflection, just thinking that doing equanimity overcomes the emotional reactions of attachment and animosity with respect to friends and enemies, and steers us towards an unbiased openness. So just thinking all sentient beings' labels of friend, enemy, and stranger are coming from my own perspective. They don't exist from the side of the person. Let yourself level the playing ground. And then moving from equanimity to equalizing, this overcomes something even deeper. Our tendency to consider ourselves more valuable and important than other sentient beings. This meditation brings a deep conviction that we and others are fundamentally equal in wanting happiness and freedom from suffering. So equanimity was leveling the playing ground of friends, enemies, and strangers. Equalizing self and others levels it between us and others. So just let your mind move with these ideas of equanimity and equality. So think that we are all so equal in having Buddha nature. We all have a mind that lacks inherent existence and can transform out of suffering and harmful actions and into complete stable happiness and care for others, as well as the enlightened ability to benefit according to their karma. So sit with that sameness. All of us have Buddha nature. And also all of us have innate ignorance that projects an appearance of inherent existence where there is none. So there's that sameness too. Good news, sameness, and bad news, sameness. So we feel that equality and we feel that equanimity. The equanimity that realizes that the labels, friends, enemies, and strangers come from our side based on our individual experiences and how we label those interactions, as well as karma created in the past. And so to equalize self and others, on your left, imagine your usual self. And on your right, visualize all other sentient beings. You can think of them in human form, a giant crowd, over on your right. And just sit with the truth of the fact that both have the reasonable wish to be safe and free of suffering. You do, they do. You do, they do. And then with some objectivity, think and judge and determine whose well-being is more important. On the one side is one sentient being. On the other side are all sentient beings minus you, this one. So it's not that you're unimportant. It's just that you're not as important as self-cherishing says you are. Just looking at proportions. What would be the logical ratio of care between the two groups? The group of just you and everyone else. His Holiness would say, if we think of only ourselves and forget about other people, then our minds occupy a very small area. Inside that small area, even tiny problems appear very big. But the moment you develop a sense of concern for others, you realize just like ourselves, they also want happiness. They also want satisfaction. When you have this sense of concern, your mind automatically widens. At this point, your own problems, even big problems, will not be so significant. The result? Big increase in peace of mind. So if you think only of yourself, only your own happiness, the result is actually less happiness. You get more anxiety, more fear. Beginning this time until now, our sworn enemy, the self-centered attitude that is responsible for all our problems, has been residing comfortably inside us as if it were our best friend. It keeps whispering in our ear, if I don't take care of you, no one will. And in our confusion, we believe it. On the other hand, our true friend, the mind that cherisheth others, which is the source of all happiness, has been kept at a distance with suspicion. Now that we clearly see the disadvantages of self-preoccupation and the benefits of caring for others, let's rectify this injustice and cherish others as much as possible in our daily life. So allow yourself to become convinced of the disadvantages of self-cherishing. Think about how it operates in your own personal life. And then think of the benefits of cherishing others. Something as simple as by being kind to others, others will be drawn to you and you'll have harmonious relationships. They'll respect you and take your words to heart. You'll create virtuous karma that brings a positive rebirth. It's the source of all happiness in this and future lives. Others are happy and your life becomes meaningful. And this virtue will also fertilize your mind so that the teachings will enter at a deeper level. And you'll die free of regrets. Generating love, compassion, and bodhicitta will come easily. And whenever you look at any sentient being, you'll have a feeling of warmth. So whether you think of examples that directly and immediately benefit you in a wholesome way, or the benefits to others in an immediate and long-term way, just connect with the benefits of cherishing others. And so exchanging self for others, you think the two principal obstacles block our exchanging self and others. First is thinking self and others are inherently separate. And the second is believing that since others' happiness and suffering doesn't affect us, we don't need to care about it. Regarding the first obstacle, remember how self and others depend on each other. Self is only posited when others is also posited. Similar to one side of the valley being this side, only when the other side is that side. Of course, which is this side and which is that side depend on our perspective, where we happen to be standing. They're not inherently this and that. When we go to the other side of the valley, it becomes this side. The second obstacle is thinking that it's not necessary to dispel others' suffering because it doesn't harm us. And it's not necessary to care for others because that doesn't benefit us. This too is based on seeing self and others as unrelated and entirely separate, when in fact, we living beings depend on one another. It would be similar to thinking there's no need to save money for my old age because that old person is a different person and her suffering doesn't harm me. It would also be similar to the hand refusing to pull a thorn out of the foot because they are unrelated and the foot's pain doesn't hurt the hand. And so given all of that, we can think, as Nagarjuna said, may all their ill deeds ripen on me. May all my virtues ripen on them. Although we cannot in fact take the sufferings of others and give them our happiness, decide that maybe we could adopt this attitude. At the beginning, you can think of taking your own future suffering of tonight or tomorrow and giving the happiness to your future self. Then expand, taking the suffering of dear ones, giving them happiness. Expand, take and give to strangers, then enemies, then all beings. And having taken on sentient beings' dukkha or suffering, transform it into lightning or whatever cleansing agent appeals to you, and destroy your self-centered attitude and self-grasping ignorance. Feel the effect of that within yourself. Imagine what it would be like to be free from that constant attachment, fear, and worry about the self. Imagine feeling the openness of genuine love and compassion that can welcome anyone into its space. It can take the suffering as black smoke or thunderclouds on the in-breath. Connect with compassion. Give all your happiness and roots of virtue in the form of golden light, connecting to the out-breath. for just a few breaths. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, connect with compassion. Breathing out, connect with love. Each cycle weakening the self-cherishing, strengthening cherishing others. And for a few final breaths, think that your self-cherishing is disappeared and your cherishing others fully expanded. Just adopting that attitude, letting go of the visualization. And dedicate. Wadi Nududang Lama Sange Drugyune Drowa Chinkamalupa De Salagupa Sho Janchu Semcho Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyuchi Ke Panyampa Me Pai Gone Gondu Pelwa Sho Tony Dawa Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Yuchi, Ke Panyampa Me Pai, Gone Gondu Pelwa Sho. Okay, thanks everyone. I went a few minutes over, I apologize, but we'll have more time for Q&A next time and more time for meditation as well. So have a little scan through the text if you've got time this week, and otherwise, see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.